Hey guys, in this video we are going to go over page 19, Intro to Functions. There is no page to tape down on page 19, so go ahead and just turn to page 19, put your little 19 in the top corner, title it Intro to Functions, and then you're going to copy down the notes that I write. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with page 19. So we have a couple different vocabulary terms that we need to review. So the first vocabulary term that we have is the domain. So our x values are the domain and the y values are what's called the range. So if we look at it in a coordinate, the x is the domain, the y is the range. Another name for domain is input. And another name for range is output. So those are a couple of the vocabulary terms that we're going to need to know for this unit. So if something is a function, every domain that's our x, has exactly one range. That's our y value. So if it's not a function, the domain x repeats or doesn't pass what we call the vertical line test. Okay, so we're going to go over a couple of different examples. So we're going to look at what's called a mapping diagram. We're going to look at a table of values. We're going to look at some graphs. And we're going to look at some equations. So our first example, a mapping diagram. So a mapping diagram is just this fancy diagram that we use to show the domain and the range. It's kind of like a table. So we list out all of our domain values. Then we have some corresponding range. So my 5 is mapped to my 2. My 4 is mapped to my 1. And 4 is also mapped to 3. So my 3 in the domain is mapped to 0. My 2 is mapped to 5. And my 7 is also mapped to 3. So in this example, since the 4 repeats, it goes to both 1 and 3. So whenever it has 2 arrows off of it, that is not a function. So we're just going to determine if it is a function or if it's not a function. Since the 4 repeats, it's not a function. Let's go ahead and look at a table. So if we have a table, we have some x's and some y's. So we'll go ahead and fill in the values of the table. So for this, none of my x values repeat. I have a 0, a 2, a 4, a 3, a 1. So no x values repeat. So it is a function. It's not a function if the x values repeat. It is a function if the x values do not repeat. All right, so let's go ahead and look at what a function would look like if it's a graph. So we're going to draw two graphs. We'll do our first graph as a circle. Our second graph is a line. So we have what's called the vertical line test. So the vertical line test tells us that we need to draw a vertical line. So here's my vertical line. If it touches my graph more than one time, it's not a function. If it touches my line one time, like in the line example, it is a function. So more than one point is not a function. Okay. And then the last example is if we're given an equation. So if we're given the equation y equals 4x minus 3, first thing we're going to do is graph it in Desmos. So we'll see what that graph looks like. Four x minus 3. Y equals 4x minus 3. So our line looks like this. So I'll go ahead and draw our line for our example. This is what our line looks like. I'll draw my vertical line. So here's my vertical line. It only touches my graph one time. So it is a function. It's not a function if it touches more than one time. So that's what you're going to be practicing today. You're going to be identifying whether or not your example is a function or is not a function. So let's go ahead and look at a couple more examples. All right, so let's look at a mapping diagram. All right, so my 1 is mapped to my 6. My 2 is mapped to my 9. My 3 is mapped to 9. 4 is mapped to 12. And 5 is mapped to 15. So, do any of my domain values repeat? So, do any of my domain values have more than one arrow coming off of it? So, the x values do not repeat. So that's a good thing. That means it is a function. We'll look at one more example. So let's say we have a table. My x values are 2, 0, 3, 2, and 1. My y values are 4, 2, 1, 5, and 7. So I hope you guys notice that here and here we have the same x value. So the x value repeats, which that's not good. It is not a function. So the x value cannot repeat, or it is not a function. So go ahead and pause the video and get all of these examples down, and then I will give you the practice that goes along with page 19.